A lot of us have this feeling there's something building up. It's creeping in on us. It's making us feel vulnerable or angry because our governments are failing us. But then people are responding to that. Neighbors are getting together, getting organized, get to know one another. This is a global movement. It's focusing on local solutions, but it's happening in your street.
It's the only thing that I've come across which incorporates water, energy, food, transport, waste and consumption. And if we don't tackle all of those, we can be doing a great job with our energy and then be blasting our ecological footprint.
That's our responsibility, it's not the government's responsibility. These are our houses, this is our sort of lifestyle, it's what we've developed. We've got a responsibility, I think, to really actually take this on and try and reduce that impact.
My name is Mick, I'm a journalist and I ask questions. We've been asking lots of questions here in the Sustainable Hour over the last 6 years, haven't we, Tony?
We have indeed.
About, what is it we're doing to our planet with all the plastic and the chemicals and the pollution and all the problems that there are at the moment piling up. And then when we talk with people, and we must have had 1,000 people in the studio coming through.
Yeah.
With 275 shows by now. But what we find whenever we talk with people is that, hey, the solutions are already here. And some people are, first movers and are, living that sort of carbon-free lifestyle. Mm. But the rest of us, we're still asking, but how do we do it?
I just want to show you that, because we're talking about water.
So what we're going to do today is we're going to launch a series where we go out and talk with people who are doing things with their own lives, changing and transforming how they live and trying to reduce their ecological footprint. And I chose to go out and talk with people from the Transition Street movement because that's really coming up strong here in Geelong. Lots of people are experimenting and neighbors are getting together and living out these solutions that we already have available to us.
This is a way of experiencing sustainability that it doesn't cost me anything, really. Living this way is at the core of my sense of happiness and fulfillment.
I don't need to fly. In fact, I've gone a step further. I said, at this stage I'm consulting and I've said, well, if I can cycle to you, you can be my client. But if I can't cycle to you, you can't be my client.
Each one of us comes away with something, an idea or often stuff that we've made, but there's always something that you leave and all of us always feel really happy when we leave.
Cheers. Cheers.
I think we need to start getting serious about, like we talk about food security, why not actually grow the food in the city? Wouldn't that be revolutionary? That creates community, that creates much better outcomes.
No one seems to know each other very much along the street anymore, and I want to bring everyone together and have that sense of community again.
The aim of this series is to provide video images of people that are actually working on solutions, and that makes it much more accessible for all of us.
Exactly. Yeah. So I've been out asking people, how do you do it? I've been talking with all these first movers, all these change makers, all the people, the doers in this city who are a little bit up front and are experimenting and finding out how to live a more sustainable, a more ecological lifestyle.
So there's 10 films?
So we'll be doing 10 segments at least for a beginning.
Yep.
So that more people can get inspired. Because I really think if we want to solve the big problem with the climate crisis, we need to talk about what each and every one of us are doing as individuals. Yep. In Denmark, we have a saying, you got to sweep in front of your own door first. And I think that's a precondition for what we talk about with climate change, that we start talking about how we transform and how we transition our own lifestyles first of all.
2009, I lived in Copenhagen, right next to that big center where 35,000 people came from all over the world to discuss the issue with climate change. I was busy with my own life at that time. I looked the other way because I thought, of course they're going to fix it. Governments will come together, they will fix it just like they fixed the hole in the ozone layer with international regulations. The only thing that can fix such a big problem. What difference can you make as an individual anyway? So I looked the other way, I went on with my life. It's gonna be okay, you know, that's how we think in Denmark. We are, after all, the happy Danes. Maybe it'll take a bit of time, but eventually we'll wake up one day and everybody will be doing the right thing. 10 years later, I have realized I was wrong. What we've learned is that our governments will not be doing what we expected of them. The carbon emissions keep rising when they should be going down, and our governments on top of that pay astronomical sums to keep the wheels in the fossil fuel industry running. They're afraid that if they make the kind of changes that we need to see now, that the climate crisis requires of us, like for instance if they made us pay for when we pollute the air, made it expensive to buy and to burn oil, coal and gas, and in that way forced us to change our way of life. They're not going to do that because they know it could make them so unpopular, and then it wouldn't be until the next election before they're kicked out and someone else comes in, gets it all undone and repelled. So what I've come to understand is that in a democracy like ours, it's us, it's the general public who are the leaders. We are the leaders and the governments are followers. It's how we behave, it's what we do in our daily lives as a majority that guides our governments. It's just like, how do you stop an airplane? Do you step out on the runway in front of it and shout and say, "We're demanding you to stop"? Well, maybe we'll manage to block the runway for a few hours, but then we'll be carried away by police and we'll certainly become enemies with all the passengers in that plane because they just wanted to take off and enjoy their drinks and get to their destination. But what if we were able to change the passengers' behavior instead? What if, as individuals, we learn to take responsibility for each and every one of our actions, our own carbon footprint? Of course, that's a much harder and longer journey, but seeing how our governments are failing to lead, I have come to the conclusion we have to change. We have to start collaborating and changing the root cause for this climate breakdown. The protesting isn't going to do it as long as we keep buying fossil fuel and keep polluting the air every other day of the week. Getting some solar panels up, that would be an obvious first step, and there's 2 million Australians that have done that already. But in our little family, to have solar panels, we found out, oh well, then we have to change that old roof first. And then there's a new wire we have to pull all the way through the garden, and everything begins to look a bit hard.
But suddenly when you get an old house and you want to turn that into a sustainable house, oh wow, it hits you. Who am I going to call? Who's going to help me? Where should I start? There's just so much to do.
Uoverskueligt is the word we say in Danish. I don't think there is an English word for it. It means something like overviewable. It's when you can't get the overview, and then what happens? Nothing happens. It's something that holds you back. And that's exactly the same with the climate crisis, because really, it's getting uoverskueligt. Where should we start? What works best? What to do? So we do nothing. We wait and we see. But for me, everything changed that day. One of my neighbors came in and suddenly he stood there in the door with his jackhammer and he said, "Well, you can borrow this." And there was that jackhammer lying on the floor for some weeks. Until then I began. I jumped on the Green It Yourself train, finally taking the tools in my own hand. In a personal way, I declared a climate emergency for our home. I set up goals for when to reach zero carbon and how to reduce our ecological footprint. I found out I could learn a lot from YouTube. But then I started getting curious to see what others were doing and went out to a festival. There was an entire festival for Green It Yourselfers like me.
Transition for me is about being involved with making a positive change in our community when it can often be overwhelming to face some of those global issues. We can feel like we're doing something practical at a local level to make a difference.
The essence of transition and the whole transition movement is a focus on head, heart and hands. Head is getting information. You go to a seminar on how to make my house more sustainable, something like that, but it's information or why climate change is a problem. Heart is harder to describe, heart and soul, but it is important. It's processes where you share your fears and concerns about climate change, your deeper thoughts in a safe way. Processes around community building. And then hands is the easy one and the best way to engage people. It's all the hands-on, practical, electric vehicles, growing local food, practical projects.
Sharing and collaborating together with your neighbors. That sounded inspiring to me. Could that be the necessary, the peaceful revolution from bottom up that I want to be a part of? That's what I'm setting out to explore, so I'm going to go around in my own neighborhood and ask people for advice. I want to learn from those who've already done it, how it works, how did you do it? Show me how.
How do you start a transition street? Could I turn my street into a transition street, for instance? I know there's this handbook full of good advice and so on, but what are the rules really and how does it work? To find out, let's talk with the coordinator of Transition Street Geelong and also with some of all the people in this town who are in the process of transitioning their own streets. I'm out to find out how do you start a transition. That's because I want to start one in my own street.
We've got maybe 10 houses in our street, and we all kind of know each other already a little bit, so that there's that stranger danger isn't kind of there. But, you know, in saying that, we want to make it awesome so then we can bring it to the wider community as well.
So the handbook is a bit like a manual with chapters on water, energy, food, transport, waste and consumption, and so on. It gives lots of advice on how you can go about these things.
Everybody has different personalities, you know, and even though you all live in the same street, you don't know each other really well, but you know each other well enough that you have that common ground. And so I think it's really nice to build that community and for us to all share and care and give, I guess. You know, it's a nice thing. So we set up a Facebook page, and we've had it for a little bit, but that's a good way for us to communicate this. And so even the people that might not come to the meetings, but they might still be interested to feed Karen's chooks.
Yes.
You know,
so they read it.
Let their kids come and have beautiful apples. And then we're talking about doing a veggie garden that we can share. And I said to my neighbour on the other side, and she was like, oh yeah, that sounds great. You know, that's awesome. So everybody's really keen to learn, and we all just want to learn together, I guess. Isn't it? Do you think?
Yeah, it is. I think it is too, and it is creating that sense of community. We're getting to know each other better as well, and yeah, we're all on a bit of a learning thing, and we all picked food. That was what we wanted to start with because it's something universal that we all like, and things have been fairly organic, haven't they?
Yeah.
To use a pun.
Yeah, that's it. And even when I went to the people that hadn't come to our meetings yet, we've had 2. So I'm chasing them up and just, you know, because I sent the initial invitation, that didn't really appeal to them. So then I went and appealed to them myself. And they're like, oh yeah, that's really interesting. It's about going and having that conversation. And then saying, you know, it's about sharing. And I think like Karen's chooks are like the beautiful thing.
And I'm going to be rescuing some more chooks now too, some battery hens. So that'll be really good to do.
Are you actually going to physically go in there and pull them out?
Well, No, but they only have them like a hen lasts for 90 days and then they and they've still got laying potential and they've never kind of had a dust bath and all of those things. So
right.
I'm feeling with the amount of food we're getting, I can probably rescue a couple of girls.
Awesome.
Which would
there
be
you
nice.
go. We're
Yeah.
saving chooks.
Yeah.
That's really good. Yeah, and I think that's a really simple, easy thing for people to think, because we have so much food waste. And, you know, in this street, like there's one couple that are elderly and then there's another lady that lives on her own, but everyone else has kids. And so, yeah, you know, we have a lot of scraps.
Yeah, a lot of scraps.
Oh, there you go.
Do you want to come and feed them to the chooks yourselves so you can see?
Oh, look at them. Yeah, they love it.
We started a transition streets group about 12 months ago, and you know, you've got the 5 themes: water, energy, food, waste and transport, and we've covered all of them, and we've ended up we've got better electricity deals through it. We share fruit and veggies, you know, when we've got excess. It's worked really well. We meet once every month or two, and now we've gone on to a new stage where we're working out where we go from now, and there'll be a lot more interchange of ideas, I'm sure, and maybe, you know, sharing of tools and equipment.
Like our neighbours, we're going to go out and get those leaves. They're going to be a good layer, or in the compost, or just bring on chooks.
This was our very first meeting in Transition Street, and so you're in this house with all these people who were members of Transition Street, all sitting around the table. And I remember saying, I am probably the last person you would ever expect at this forum. This is not me, this is not what I do, you know. I sit in business, I manage people, I manage organizations, that's what I do. I don't go into these spaces. So for me, it was actually quite it was quite a leap just to get in the room. But what was even more profound was that in the next few minutes, when everybody shared their story about who they were, what they were, and, you know, their journey in life, it was like, wow, I can't believe these are my neighbours. And you walk past these people every day in the street, and they're all so amazing people, and yet we don't know it. We're completely oblivious to it because society kind of separates us all from one another, so we don't have this connection. And so I think things like Transition Street are really powerful for reconnecting and joining up people with their own neighbours, and just understanding who people are, what they have to offer, what they have to share, the amount of wisdom, knowledge, experience, and, you know, and people are basically there to help connect and join people, rather than this, you know, corporate separatism and trying to keep people and holding fear and doing all of those sorts of things. You come into these environments and you realise, hang on, that's all fake. This is the real world, and we need to spend more time here.
Just to bring the community together. We're all really disjointed and no one seems to know each other very much along the street anymore. And I want to bring everyone together and have that sense of community again.
We get to know our neighbours and bring the horizon of trust back from, you know, the multinationals who, you know, run the food chain, back to our neighbourhoods. And if the horizon of trust is in our neighbourhood, or in our community, then that's resilience. That's true resilience.
Actually, through the Transition Streets process and becoming part of a group, I've made some really close friends as part of my Transition Streets group. And it's been really, for me, not knowing anybody in Geelong when I first moved here, it's been really special, the people that I've met and meeting on a regular basis. So, you know, it evolves so that you have those incidental things that you do together. We share things and everybody brings a plate. We share recipes, or too much of stuff that we've got we'll share, or ideas for cutting down your power or water or anything. And each one of us comes away with something, an idea or often stuff that we've made, but there's always something that you leave, and all of us always feel really happy when we leave.
It's all about relationships and working together on practical projects and doing what we can, not necessarily doing everything, because the book is obviously, and the workbooks are really comprehensive. It's great to see just a few things that we can be doing and building up what is, a growing movement of people who are really passionate about making real change for themselves, but also for their neighbourhood as well, and seeing things emerge they didn't think they could do on their own by doing it together as part of a transition streets group. So it's really exciting, it's really great, and the network is growing.
Most Australians live as though there are 5 planets. If everyone lived the way we live, we would need 5 planets, and of course we don't have that. We've overshot Earth's resources in March this year. We've got climate crisis going on, so everything that we can do will help, and you'd be amazed at the impact of your actions on all the people that you know. So we want this information to spread, and so the ecological footprint that is in the Transition Street workbook that neighbours get together and form a little group and do helps you sort of understand what your footprint is and where that comes from. So again, anyone that would like to form a little neighbourhood group and get free books to go through that program, come and see me when we're having tea and coffee.
How do people do it if they want to start a transition group in very concrete terms?
Well, the first thing is to contact me, and you can do that via email, or my phone number's on the site. And I get together with people over a cuppa usually and just explain what's involved. And basically all it is, we have a template invitation letter. We decide on a first meeting date, time and venue, and I email the person that letter if they're happy to go ahead, and they fill out the details, which is just really the date, time, venue and their name and their contact details and an RSVP date. Then they email it back to me. One of our local MPs has been kind enough to offer to print 200 of those. I get it back to them. They just letterbox their area, and within 1 to 2 weeks they'll have between 4 and 10 households who want to start, and it's very exciting and it's very fast. And then we just have the first meeting. I'll come to support. Everyone gets a free 180-page book that takes them through the process. There's no need to design anything or create anything. They just usually bring food to share, and then they're off and running. And they also get connected through other things with other groups in the region. Westerners, we're reasonably wealthy, rich people on this planet, and we're the ones with the big ecological footprint. It's not poor people, it's not the lower socioeconomic groups, it's not people in Africa. We're the ones who need to make the change. So even if government said tomorrow we're going to make all these big changes, we would still need to make changes as well, because a lot of it is about behaviour. So it's also very empowering, because it's something you can do at home in lots and lots of different ways. The other thing is that it's holistic. It's the only thing that I've come across which incorporates water, energy, food, transport, waste and consumption. And if we don't tackle all of those, we can be doing a great job with our energy and then be blasting our ecological footprint out of the water by blowing it on something else, like 5 trips to Europe in a year or something like that. So it's about getting a whole picture, and then it's about connecting with others. So we've got friends within walking distance, and then we've got a larger community as well in Geelong, of a whole community of friendly, caring people who are supportive. And so some groups really got that, people really got that. In the early days, I think I didn't stress the ecological footprint enough, and that the goal is to get that down from an average of 5 planets per person to 1. So that's our goal, is by the time we've gone through those at least 7 meetings, maybe 1 a month, is that we actually have reduced our ecological footprint on the planet to 1 planet.
think global, act local. That was what the saying was. And so it was a really good saying, but we really didn't have any practical way of applying it. And for me, Transition Streets was probably the very first time that you had something that you could use to apply this notion of, there's a global issue, but you can do things locally. And so for me, that was Transition Street, was this doorway into how you could do something in your own life, in your own space, in your own world. And that's really for me what Transition Street was.
Thousands of fish have been killed as the result of climate change and water mismanagement. Health authorities are warning Australians to stay out of the heat today as temperatures climb yet again after heat records were broken yesterday. Australia's ongoing heatwave has been pushing temperatures to almost 50 degrees Celsius in parts of the country as the nation has recorded some of its hottest days ever. Health officials are warning Australians to stay out of the heat and to keep...
We, the young, are deeply concerned about our future. Humanity is currently causing the 6th mass extinction of species, and the global climate system is at the brink of a catastrophic crisis. Its devastating impacts are already felt by millions of people around the globe, yet we are far from reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement.
The paradox is, that there's really big stuff happening, and at the same time, I've got to wash the dishes. I've got to speak nicely to the neighbour. I've got to be patient with people who don't know anything about peak oil or climate change, at the same time as feeling like, stop doing that, And this is just, I think, it's the age we're living in, and we've got to find our way through that. And I think kindness to ourselves and others, and care and nurturing is probably the quickest and most effective way through that.
I think the most important thing to understand is that we're all carbon-based life forms, and we retain H2O. If we didn't have it, if we didn't have the plants around us generating water, we would not be here. And it's the oxygen they make, the hydrogen's been stored here in an atmosphere, and it is part of all of us, part of every plant, part of every animal, every microbe, part of everything. It's life. Water is life. We've got a little hothouse here that was made, and it's made really easily of reclaimed materials. It does have some brick walls in there. There's a roof on here that's got a gutter on the side. There's a tank that's storing some water, and I'm using fresh water here. So it's such a small area. This tank can hold enough water that just waters all these bits and pieces that are growing in here. These plants have all been turned into perennials, and if you see the shelving behind me, that's where all the seeds are raised. So nice and easy, and it's nice and warm in here. 25, 30 degrees all the time. I think that anyone could actually make use of the water just by having a storage tank in and using a simple pipe and just working with gravity. So if you can transport it to a spot that simply has a trickle feed or a feed that is run by gravity that just allows a drip system, it just works really well. There's no reason why you can't just use a watering can and have your tank up a little bit higher. There's also no reason why you can't go the whole hog and do it. 9,000 litres of unchlorinated, unfluoridated, fresh, God's gift to man. God's gift to nature, really. You need to start with a design. It's all about harvesting water. So we've got natural downpipes feeding a tank that we're standing on. The overflow from this goes into this pond down here. So you can see the top of the pond over here. So that does have fish in it, and that does have plants in it. That pond does a similar idea, having something, a water source in your yard. So when we really get a big heavy deluge, it fills up most of this yard, but because the trees have the ability to sink the water into the ground and it's spread over a wide area, it disappears. So slowly though. So the object is to slowly do it. Conservatively, it would take, I think these tanks underneath us are a bit over $1,000. The framework around it, well, it's a beautiful pergola anyway. And we've got this decking that we've got here. To build the pond, I'm not really sure how much they cost, but to get the pond liners, you can get those at Bunnings. You need to have a good pond liner. What we've always done is we've dug irrigation pipes, and we've got stormwater drains, and we flush the water straight down into the system. If we can slow it down and keep it on our properties, we're keeping good, clean water easily here. So what it does is it's less watering over time. You've got plants growing all the time, and if you do look around, you can see lots of plants here, lots of variation. There's bees hovering everywhere. There's things that are flowering every time of the year. So everything needs to be fed, and to feed things properly, fresh water is all part of it.
If you look at Geelong's water supply, it's fairly vulnerable. The Otways, it's a great catchment area for water, but the population of Geelong is growing enormously, and there's so much water that is just wasted. And I just hate wasting things. You've got this lovely water coming off your roof. It's perfect for use in the house, so why let it run down to the bay? You can use all this water. When I decided to start storing water, one of the first things I did was put in this underground tank. I did this in about 2003. It holds about 4,000 litres, and it's got a submersible pump in there, and the submersible pump can pump into this tank here. And I'll show you what happens when we have plenty of water, as we have now. It's about 6 feet deep, but you can see at the moment this is an elbow in a 100mm pipe that actually runs out into the gutter. So any overflow at the moment goes straight out into the gutter. But if I wanted to, in drought conditions, I could turn that elbow down, and after sweeping the gutter and making it all nice and clean, if we've got a heavy rain, I could put a sandbag across the gutter and the water would actually run in here. Now obviously you wouldn't use that for water in the house, which is what I can do, is use this just for the garden, which is great, because 4,000 litres of extra water for the garden, that lasts you a little while. And then these tanks, I've got two 4,500 litre tanks, and the combined storage is around about 13,000 litres. The GREYWATER comes underground here, and there's a line that runs down under the hives, and there's branches that come off to feed each fruit tree with a slotted corrugated plastic pipe which runs round the tree and distributes the GREYWATER to each tree. And don't have to water them much at all in the summer. The GREYWATER does it all. I reorganised all the plumbing so that all the shower, the laundry, the bathroom waste, shower and bath, that all goes down into this GREYWATER pit. It holds about 60 litres, and it has a little submersible pump in it which comes on automatically when the water level rises to a certain point, and that water then gets pumped out to either the front yard or the backyard. And I'll lift the deck, part of the deck here, and actually show you what we have. There's no toilet waste here, it's only bathroom and laundry and stuff like that. So all I do is I push in the valve, that blocks off this, stops it going down there to the sewer, and now it runs along here and through this screen, because that sorts out the any hair or lint from your laundry, and it goes into this tank. I made this tank just by digging a hole, nice sort of rectangular hole, pretty, try and get it as even shaped as possible, and then put chicken wire around the outside, a couple of layers of chicken wire, spaced a little bit out from the edge, and then very carefully you start just mixing up mortar in a barrow with a little bit of fine aggregate, about 6 or 7 mil gravel, and then from the base, you've poured the base and sort of troweled that in, and then you just work it up the sides with a trowel, like the brickies use. The bricklayers use a trowel for sticking the mortar on the bricks. So it's a pretty rough job, but it holds water, and it's very easy and cheap to do. I mean, chicken wire from the recycle place, or got friends with chooks, they've got a bit of stuff left over, and just a wheelbarrow with a bag of cement and sand and gravel, and it's perfectly waterproof, and it holds about 60 litres. There's a submersible pump in there, and it pumps either to the front yard out that way, all underground, or the backyard down this way, and it saves me heaps of water on the garden. In the summer, if we have rainwater in the tanks, our use of Barwon water is down to about 20 litres a day for the two of us. And when you look at who was John Brumby in the drought, asking Melbourne people to get down to 150 litres per person per day, this is pretty damn good. 20, for the two of us, 20 litres a day. That's if we've got rainwater, and you need plenty of storage of rainwater. You cannot go overboard with water storage. When you turn on your hot water tap, if your hot water tank is quite a long way from the tap, you're probably going to draw through about 4 or 5 litres of water before you get any hot water. So what I've done is I've got it's a circulator pump and a timer button. I go and push the button, and what happens is the pump turns on and it draws the water in the hot water line from the tank, but that's cold water now, and it draws that through and returns it to the cold water inlet of your hot water heater, so that when that's pumped it through, I can turn this on as soon as it's finished, and I get hot water straight away without wasting that 4 or 5 litres of cold water. There we go. We turn on and we've got hot water. Lovely.
With the bucket that I have in the shower, I generally turn the hot water on. It is winter, so I'm not going to hop in until it's warm. So what I do is I turn the hot water on, it goes straight into the bucket so we're not wasting any, and then I jump in the shower once it's a good temperature. So, you've got a bit of water in your bucket then, and it can be used down the toilet, or if it's dry we can put it in the garden.
I've got the pipework arranged so it can pump off either one of these tanks, and there's a very simple T-piece arrangement where I've got the tank water on one side of the T and the Barwon water on the other side of the T with taps, and those valves can either select Barwon water for running the whole house and the garden, or tank water for running the whole house and garden. And I can very easily switch those over. Our roof area is around about 300 square metres, and that means for every millimetre of rain we have, we get about 300 litres. Unfortunately, with a tiled roof, if it's been dry for a long time, the tiles will suck up 1 or 2 millimetres before you get any runoff. But it means, let's say if we get 10 millimetres of rain, and the tiles are already sort of saturated, well, I've got 3,000 litres of water. 300 by 10, that's 3,000 litres. You know, it's well over halfway up one of these tanks. And we've had a lot of rain in the last May, you know, so there's actually been overflow going out into the gutter. But look, I would just love to have more storage, because that would mean, if I had like even 30,000 litres of storage, I could be watering my garden for a lot longer than I do, because if we get 2 or 3 months with very little rain, as we had at the beginning of this year, I go through masses of Barwon water just keeping this garden moist. The tanks are about $1,000 each. It's going to cost you a bit of money. And hooking up the pump, you've got an electrician for the wiring. Fortunately, I've got a son-in-law who's a plumber. He helps me a lot with that work. But it's very easy to do. Geelong's rainfall, if you look over the 100-year records, it's around about 550 millimetres per year. It's much drier than the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. In 2007, I think it was, Geelong's rainfall was only a little over 300 millimetres. Now that's about the same as the little desert in Western Victoria. That is desperately dry. So any measure of saving water is beneficial for the environment. And the other thing is, I like to be independent. I mean, let's think what might happen if for some reason the water supply was to fail. If there's a cyber attack on the Barwon water system and they can't fix it for a few days or even a couple of weeks, what would we do? I mean, you need water many, many times a day for everything. So it's partly to have that little bit of security, independence. And it's very satisfying.
Energy. It's a big slice of the carbon cake. And what I think is really good about it is that here's one area where we actually have an influence as individuals. You and I, we can make a difference. We can decide whether or not we want to be part of the old polluting fossil fuel powered system, or whether we want to move over to something that doesn't pollute, something that gets cheaper and cheaper by the day. Each and every one of us has all the power it takes to switch over to a 100% green electricity provider. We can put solar on the roof. And as a matter of fact, that's what a lot of people are doing around the world. Here in Australia, more than 2 million households get their power straight from the roof and straight from the sun. And of course we do that because we save money that way. A solar system actually pays for itself over something like 5 years, and after that, the energy it produces is free. That's right. Free energy actually does exist. Where I come from, Denmark, we like to harness the wind. Already next year, this population of 5.5 million people, which is just about the same as here in Victoria, the Danes will be getting 70% of their electricity from renewable energy sources. To make that jump is an absolute no-brainer. But we need to get smarter about how we use the energy. Because when all of us begin to switch over to renewables in big numbers, and when we begin to really rely on what we produce at home on our own roofs, We'll have to get smarter and use less energy, about half of what we're using today. That's doable, but it will require that we find out how to do it. Maybe even some investments, new machines, new fridges, new stoves, and so on. We have to get used to using less energy. Our houses also need better insulation. So when we talk about energy, we certainly also talk about renovating and retrofitting your home, modernizing it, making it fit for a low-carbon lifestyle.
There's such a huge impact in, the energy that goes into the production of housing and the use of houses, actually. And that, up to 33% of the actual Earth's resources are being utilised to build and use sort of buildings, So it is a huge contributor to the impacts that are happening on our climate here, So, and that's our responsibility, It's not the government's responsibility. These are our houses, this is our sort of lifestyle, it's what we've developed. We've got a responsibility, I think, to really actually take this on and try and reduce that impact, And we can do that really easily by designing much cleverer buildings, buildings that are responsive to our climate, and allow people to actually sort of interact with them and not have to think a lot, I suppose, about being really sustainable, because the hardest thing that we have to implement is trying to change people's behaviour, it's really, really difficult. So if we can design buildings that are a little bit intuitive and actually respond to the climate without people having to sort of think about it, then it's going to be a lot easier for that sort of, I think, to happen over time.
The house we bought in 2015 is 100 years old. And I tell you, when it's cold outside, it's just as cold inside. And the same, when there's a heat wave outdoor, we certainly feel that indoor. I invited some of my friends over to give me some advice on what they thought I should do and where we should start. And every one of them said, don't think you can do it all at once. Start with just one thing. And then maybe some months later, fix another one. So that's how I've been going about it over the years, one step at a time. I started with the insulation on the roof and under the floor. Then we replaced one window, then another. And then one day when we got a new neighbor, a Danish carpenter who just moved in next door, studying at the university here in Geelong, Kenneth, he had a look at our shed at the back and the garage, and he said, why don't we make it into like a tiny house, a sustainable, usable, climate-safe, multifunction room where the temperature always stays the same, no matter what the weather is like outside.
In Denmark, we built for the houses to last 100 years, at least.
We all have an energy journey ahead of us. Each one will be different. How much or how little you want to do the practical work yourself, that's actually not the issue. There is no excuse not to get started on this part of the transition. I've made that promise to myself, that commitment, that declaration that I want to go zero carbon within the next 5-6 years. By 2025, all electric, zero carbon and zero pollution into the atmosphere. It'll be cheaper, it'll be healthier, it'll be better, more comfortable and super satisfying. And I'm inviting you and my neighbors and everyone I know and everyone I meet to join me on this journey to put the carbon and the pollution behind us.